Good morning. I'm so glad that you joined us as we begin our new series from the book of Ruth. This is going to be a great story as we go through, but we need to do a little bit of a history lesson before we really get into the whole story. And I know some of you aren't a big fan of history, but that's okay. Bear with me because it will play into this entire series, and you need to know where this all started out. So look with me in Ruth chapter 1. Ruth chapter 1, we're going to begin with verse 1. And the whole series is about redemption. That's what the entire book is about, is God's redemption story. It started all the way back in Genesis chapter 3, and it goes all the way through the book of Revelation. And this morning we're going to look here at Ruth, and we're going to take this book in a different way than most studies through this. So let's look at verse 1 and verse 2 together. It says, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country." So you have Moab and his wife and his 2 sons, and they're going into this land. Verse 2, "The name of the man was Elimelech, whose name means my king is God. And the name of his wife Naomi, which means pleasant. And the name of his 2 sons was Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah." So I want you to understand these 2 sons. Mahlon means sickly and Chilion means perishing. And so these are not the best names. Now, Elimelech, that's a great name. And evidently he was a great religious man. He knew the truth about God. He had studied. He probably grew up learning the Talmud, which is the first 5 books of the law, the book of Moses. He was raised in knowing everything. He was a great Jewish man, but something happened along the lines where he went off to a land called Moab. Now I want you to see that there is something here about Moab, because Moab is not a place that you want to live. Moab's name, and also was the name of this territory with its inhabitants, came from the incestuous relationship that Lot had with his oldest daughter. This is not a good place. Genesis chapter 19, verses 24 through 36 gives us the story. It says, "Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt." See, she was leaving Sodom, but her heart was still there. "Now Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. And Lot went up out of Zoar, and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar. And he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him. Excuse me. that we may conceive and have children. Sorry. And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. And he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. And it came to pass on the morrow that the firstborn said unto the younger, Behold, I lay last night with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son, and they called his name Moab. The same is the father of the Moabites unto this day. And the younger, she also bare a son, and called his name Benami. The same is the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. So, I mean, we're sitting here, and this is like an episode off of the Jerry Springer show. I mean, this is a horrible situation. And this is a city that they come to. What a dreadful place to find yourself in. Something that is so wicked and far from the presence of God. Yet this is where we're at. Now, we're about to find there's two more characters that enter our story. Orpah, a Moabite woman, a woman who didn't know about the true God, the living God, and also Ruth. And both of those married these two sons. Now let's pick up in verse 3. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her two sons, and they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her two sons and her husband. So they're all dead and gone, and it's just left these three women. It says, Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of that place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her. And they went on their way to return into the land of Judah. Notice, they were on their way back to Judah. All three of them. And Naomi said unto her two daughters-in-law, Go, return to each her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Now I want you to notice closely, where is Naomi sending Orpah and Ruth to? She's not sending them back to where they're going to hear the gospel. She's not sending them back to where they're going to be spiritually fed. She's not sending them back to a place where they can grow and nurture and learn more about the true and living God. She's sending them back to this wicked Moabite nation. Now, this is a place that's not all that great. They worship pagan gods. They worship the God that delighted in the sacrifice of children. Now, you parents, I want you to stop and think for a moment. Could you imagine taking your child, and especially if it's your only child, taking it and giving it to a god for it to be burnt to death, so that way you could be found well-pleasing and gain that God's favor? Really? And this is what Naomi, who was raised in Bethlehem, who knew God, who knew what he had for them. This is the nation that she's sending him to? Let me ask you this. How many of us are pushing people away from God? How many of us are saying, you go back to your ungodly, your wicked, destructive lives, and don't worry about coming with me where you can hear the truth proclaimed? I want you to think about that. That's a sobering thought. And we read the story of Ruth all the time, and we just pass over that because it's not the Ruth story. But Naomi here is saying, go back. Let's continue on. She says, then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, surely, or certainly, we will return with you unto your people. Notice, Ruth and Orpah both were willing to go back with Naomi. They were willing to leave their people and move to a country they've never heard of, to go to a people they've never met. They would be outsiders, but they were okay with that because they were going with Naomi. These two ladies, outsiders to the Jewish faith, outsiders to knowing what God can do for them. I'm sure they had heard what God had done for the nation of Israel, for the tribes of Judah, but they hadn't experienced that themselves. They were in the right direction, but Naomi. Both were headed towards a place where they could hear the life-changing, soul-cleansing power of the living God. And Naomi says, no. No. She says, I would rather you go back to that sin-infested, wicked nation that has no other desire than to promote and practice all sorts of evilness in this world. I would rather you go back there than to come where you can hear the life-changing power of Jesus Christ. So they would have learned that God could forgive them. They would learn how to worship the one true God. People can be lost and not just worship a false god. They can be lost all around us. What are we telling them? Are we living in an example that would draw them to Christ? Are we living in an example that would bring them closer in knowledge to what God has for them? Or are we pushing them away? Are we telling them, I would rather you rot in hell for the rest of your life than ever hear what God can do for you? And I know that is a harsh statement, but that is exactly what Naomi is doing here. She is saying, I would rather you be lost in your sin and die in hell than to come with me. See, somewhere along the lines, she had forgotten about the power of God. She forgot about the ability of God. She forgot about the love of God. What a horrible place to find yourself in. Listen to these words from the Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. It says, "Wherefore remember that you being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision, by that which is called the circumcision, or the Jews, in the flesh made by hands, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who sometimes were far off are made near by the blood of Christ." Now see, Orpah and Ruth both were no loster than you and I were lost. Because lost is lost. All of us one time had zero hope. We were done for. But God had a plan for Ruth, and we'll see that in the next couple of weeks. For it was through her that David would come, who through him came the promised Messiah, the Redeemer of mankind. And I believe that God would have taken care of Orpah as well if she would have continued on. Now let's look at verse 11. Naomi said, "Turn again, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband." And if should say, "I have hope, if I should have a husband even tonight, and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. Woe is me, woe, woe, woe is me." Go back. There is no possible way that anything good could happen here. Somehow, Naomi forgot that with God there is nothing that is impossible. There is no greater stake that we can make, no graver mistake that we can ever make than pushing someone away from God, from not telling them about the true God, giving them the opportunity. We try to come up with every excuse under the sun why we don't share the gospel with someone. Or worse, we tell them with our actions that they are too far gone, that they are too lost for God to save them. Look at your life. Look at all of the problems that you've had in your life. Look at all your mistakes that you've made in your life. And I want you to listen to this very closely. There is absolutely nothing of those mistakes that could ever make God love you less. There's absolutely nothing in those mistakes that could ever make God not want to love you. That could ever make him say, "No, I can't accept you. No, I can't use you." But yet, we too many times show it with our lives that God can't accept brokenness. Yet we pride ourselves on the fact that God accepted us. Well, if God can't accept brokenness, but he accepted us, Because I know me, and I'm sure you're a lot like me, you've got some brokenness in your life. You have some, say, some skeletons in your closet that you really don't want other people to know about. And I'm not asking you to divulge what that is. I'm just saying I want us to be honest and real with ourselves this morning, that we focus on bringing people to Christ, not pushing them away. We need to be showing and telling the world that there is a redemption for them. We know that this is a place that we can find forgiveness and love and hope and grace and mercy and freedom. We know that this is a place where we can belong and be accepted and brought into the family. We know this is a place where we can grow and mature. We know that this is a place where we can discover that we are children of the Most High King and we are royalty. This is a place where we have the chains of our past and shame shattered and realize that we are no longer slaves, but sons and daughters of the King of Kings, and we are children of God. Why is it we keep telling them, go? God can't save you. Church, we need to wake up. We're supposed to be bringing people to Christ, not telling them, go die in your sin. Look at all the people that Jesus encountered in his ministry. There was an adulterous woman that was caught in the very act of adultery. And when she was brought to Jesus, he didn't say, you need to rot, you need to burn in hell, and you need to be stoned. Go away, get out of my presence. No, he flat out said, you're right, the law says she has to be stoned, so stone her. But the one who has never committed a sin cast the first stone. And they left. And Jesus said, where are your accusers? He said, I don't condemn you. I forgive you. And salvation came to that woman. You got the woman at the well in John chapter 4. I love that story because she came looking for one thing and God gave her exactly what she needed. And when she left to go tell the town, she left her water pitcher behind because her need had changed. And instead of needing water, she needed to tell others about Christ. What happened to us? Where did we get so off that instead of telling others about Christ, we pushed them away from Christ? May we rise up, especially at this time in the history of our world, and proclaim the redemption of Christ to the world. May we never push someone away from knowing Christ. And especially may we never push them back to their evil, wicked, and ungodly lifestyle instead of showing them a pathway to God. We need to be loving and caring and considerate and push people and direct people to God, not push them from God. Because if it wasn't for somebody showing us the way to God, we would be lost in our sins. And we don't need somebody to push the lost farther away. We got the world for that. We need, as believers, to stand up, proclaim God's truth, that He loves you, that He has a purpose for you, He has a plan for you, and draw them into His family. Now look at verse 14 with me. And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. And this is the last time that Orpah is ever mentioned in the Bible. For all we know, she could have went back to Moab and died lost in her sin. Simply because Naomi was insistent on saying no. Now remember, we saw here in verse 11 that they said, no, we will come with you. We will go with you. And even when they wanted to, she said, no. When people give us the opportunity to share Christ with them, we don't need to tell them no. We need to tell them, sure, let me show you. Let me tell you what God has done for me. Let me tell you what God can do for you. Let me tell you about how much He loves you. See, that's what we need to be doing. The last memory that Naomi has of Orpah, she was weeping and kissed her goodbye. Orpah was willing to go with Naomi and Ruth, but was literally talked out of it. How many times do we talk others out of knowing and accepting Jesus Christ as our Savior? Instead of leading them down the road to redemption, we tend to push them back toward the road of destruction. Instead of Orpah finding the way to acceptance and freedom and new life, she went back alone. Alone. We were never created to be alone. We are created to be in relationship with someone. Whether it be a friendship or a marriage relationship between a man and a woman, we are to be growing in a relationship. And Naomi said, not only do I not want you to hear about God, I want you alone. Wow.